Sophia and Daniel had been married for 7 years, their love story seemingly plucked from the pages of a fairy tale. She often reminisced about the day they met, a chance encounter at a bookstore in Manhattan. They bonded over their love for literature, and within a year, Daniel had proposed during a trip to the Hamptons. Their life together had been filled with laughter, adventure, and a deep companionship that Sophia cherished. At 35, Sophia was a successful marketing executive in New York, and though her career kept her busy, she always longed for a romantic getaway to Paris, the city of love. It had been a dream of hers since childhood, inspired by the classic French movies she adored. So when Daniel surprised her with a 2-week trip for their anniversary, she was overjoyed. "I can't believe you planned all this," she said, eyes glistening with excitement as she held onto his arm at JFK Airport. Daniel, a 38-year-old financial analyst, smiled warmly. "You deserve it, sophomore. We both do." As their flight took off, Sophia felt a sense of blissful anticipation. She pictured herself strolling along the Seine, sipping wine at a charming cafe, and sharing stolen kisses with her husband beneath the glittering Eiffel Tower. They arrived in Paris on a crisp autumn evening, the air carrying a gentle chill mixed with the aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted chestnuts from street vendors. Their taxi weaved through the historic streets, passing stunning landmarks bathed in golden lights. Their hotel was a luxurious 5-star establishment in the heart of the city, offering a breathtaking view of the Eiffel Tower. As they stepped into their suite, Sophia gasped in awe. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the shimmering cityscape, and a bottle of chilled champagne awaited them on the marble table. "It's perfect," she whispered, stepping onto the balcony. The lights of Paris stretched endlessly before her, the Seine River glistening under the night sky. "Thank you, my love." Daniel wrapped his arms around her from behind, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "Anything for you." Sophia felt warmth spread through her chest. At that moment, she believed she had everything she had ever wanted. But she had no idea that this dreamlike trip would soon turn into a nightmare, one that would change her life forever. The first sign that something was wrong came on their second day in Paris. The morning had started beautifully, freshly baked croissants at a charming cafe, a romantic walk along the Seine, and laughter over cappuccinos. Sophia was determined to savor every moment, but something about Daniel felt off. It was subtle at first. He seemed distracted, his gaze darting toward his phone every few minutes. He would force a smile when she spoke, but she noticed his responses were unusually short. His usual affectionate gestures, playful touches, stolen kisses were absent. As they strolled through the Champs-Élysées, admiring the luxury boutiques and the historic architecture, Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression instantly tense. "I need to take this," he muttered, stepping away before she could protest. Sophia watched as he walked toward a quieter area, his voice hushed. She couldn't make out what he was saying, but the way his fingers tapped anxiously against his leg made her uneasy. "Work call?" she asked when he returned, trying to keep her tone casual. "Yeah, just something urgent from the office." He forced a smile. She nodded, but her stomach twisted with doubt. Daniel had promised to disconnect from work during this trip. Why was he suddenly so preoccupied? The uneasy feeling followed her through the day, lingering even as they returned to their hotel to change for dinner. That evening, Daniel took her to a Michelin-starred restaurant near the Eiffel Tower, a place he had booked weeks in advance. The candlelit atmosphere, soft violin music, and exquisite cuisine should have been the perfect ingredients for a romantic night. But Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Halfway through their meal, Daniel's phone vibrated again. He glanced at the screen and immediately excused himself. "I'll be right back," he said, grabbing his phone and disappearing toward the restrooms. Sophia sighed, sipping her wine as she stared at his empty seat. He was acting strangely, and she was tired of pretending she didn't notice. Her eyes drifted to his phone, which he had left on the table. Normally, Daniel was protective of his phone, always keeping it in his pocket. But tonight, he had left it right in front of her. A soft vibration. A new message flashed on the screen. Sophia's heart stopped as she read the words. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I love you. Elise." Her breath hitched. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Elise? Who the hell was Elise? Her fingers trembled as she stared at the message, her mind racing. This wasn't a work call. This wasn't an innocent text. She wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, a wrong number, anything but what her gut was telling her. But deep down, she already knew. Something was very, very wrong. Sophia kept quiet for the rest of the night, though her mind was anything but silent. The romantic glow of Paris had dimmed, replaced by a suffocating weight pressing against her chest. She forced a smile as they finished their meal, nodding absently as Daniel spoke, but she barely heard a word. Who was Elise? And why had she sent that message? The drive back to the hotel felt endless. Daniel was unusually cheerful, talking about their plans for the next day. The Louvre, a boat ride on the Seine, a cozy dinner at a hidden bistro. But to Sophia, every word felt like a lie. As soon as they stepped into their hotel suite, she turned to face him, her hands clenched into fists. Who is Elise? The words cut through the room like a blade. Daniel froze, his face paling for the briefest moment before he quickly masked it with a forced frown. What? He asked, feigning confusion. You heard me. Her voice was sharp, edged with the anger she had held in all evening. Who is Elise, Daniel? His jaw tensed. She's just a colleague. Sophia let out a bitter laugh. Colleagues don't say, I love you to each other. Daniel's eyes flickered with something. Guilt, panic, frustration. It's not what you think, he muttered. Then tell me what it is, she demanded, stepping closer. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. His silence only fueled her fury. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he ran a hand through his hair. Elise is someone from my past. Sophia narrowed her eyes. Your past? She repeated, crossing her arms. Then why is she texting you now? Daniel shook his head. Look, it's complicated. I don't want your excuses, Daniel, she interrupted, her voice shaking. Tell me the truth. He exhaled sharply, his frustration slipping through. I don't have to explain every little thing to you, Sophia. Can we just drop this? She stared at him in disbelief. The man she had trusted, the man who had promised her forever, was lying to her face. And she wasn't going to let it go. The truth unfolds. Daniel eventually climbed into bed, claiming exhaustion. But Sophia knew she wouldn't sleep. As his breathing deepened and his body stilled, she made her move. Carefully, she reached for his phone on the nightstand. Her heart pounded as she pressed his thumb against the sensor. The screen unlocked instantly. She hesitated for just a second before opening his messages. And what she found shattered her completely. There were dozens of messages from Elise. Some recent, some dating back years. Can't wait to see you. The kids miss you. When are you coming home? Her vision blurred as she opened the photo gallery. The first image was of Daniel, smiling, holding a little boy no older than 4. Beside him stood a beautiful brunette woman, her arms wrapped around Daniel's waist. The next photo was of a little girl, giggling as Daniel lifted her into the air. Sophia scrolled through more pictures, her fingers trembling. Family vacations, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. It hit her like a freight train. Daniel wasn't just cheating. He had a whole other family in Paris. Her stomach twisted violently, and she barely made it to the bathroom before she collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. The man she had built a life with, the man she had loved unconditionally for 7 years, had been living a double life. and she had been nothing more than his secret. Sophia sat on the cold bathroom floor, her body trembling as she clutched Daniel's phone. The weight of what she had just uncovered pressed down on her like a collapsing building. Daniel wasn't just cheating. He wasn't just having an affair. He was married. Elise wasn't some ex-flame or casual mistress. She was his wife. And the two little children in the photos? They were his kids. Sophia's stomach twisted violently. She barely made it to the toilet before she threw up, her body rejecting the betrayal that had seeped into her soul. Her mind raced as she scrolled further, needing to know just how deep the deception ran. Emails, hundreds of them. Messages exchanged between Daniel and Elise, planning family vacations, talking about their children's milestones. Our son lost his first tooth today. Our daughter starts school next year. I miss you. Can't wait for you to be home. Bank transactions showed that he had been supporting two households, paying for an apartment in Paris, sending money to Elise regularly, even paying for the children's school fees. Then came the documents. Sophia's hands shook as she opened a PDF file titled Marriage Certificate, Daniel and Elise Moreau. Her breath hitched. The date. It was before she and Daniel had even met. Tears spilled down her cheeks as the horrifying reality sank in. She had been the other woman all along. The memories came flooding back with brutal clarity. Their rushed wedding. He had insisted on a small, private ceremony, saying he didn't want the stress of a big event. His constant business trips. The way he'd disappear for weeks at a time, claiming work demanded it. The times he had avoided discussions about children, brushing off her dreams of starting a family with vague excuses. It had all been a cover. He had never truly belonged to her. He had always belonged to them, Elise and their children. Sophia's hands curled into fists. The pain in her chest transformed into something else. Rage. As the first light of dawn broke over the Paris skyline, Sophia made a decision. Daniel couldn't walk away from this. He couldn't just go on living his perfect double life, deceiving everyone around him. She was going to make him pay, one way or another. The air was thick with tension as Sophia followed Daniel through the dimly lit streets of Paris. The city of love had turned into a city of betrayal, each step she took fueled by rage and devastation. He had left their hotel claiming he had to meet an old friend. But Sophia knew the truth. He wasn't meeting a friend. He was meeting his real family. Her heart pounded as she trailed him through winding alleyways and cobblestone streets, barely able to keep her hands steady. He walked with purpose as if this were routine because to him it was. Finally, he stopped in front of a charming three-story townhouse with ivy creeping up its stone facade. The door swung open before he could even knock. Sophia ducked behind a parked car, her breath catching in her throat. A woman stood at the entrance, Elise. She was beautiful, with long chestnut hair and an air of effortless elegance. But it wasn't her beauty that made Sophia's stomach twist. It was the way Daniel smiled at her. The way he leaned in and kissed her as if he had never kissed anyone else before. Then the final blow. Two little children ran to the door, squealing in delight. Papa! Sophia felt as if the ground beneath her had been ripped away. Daniel scooped up the youngest child, a little girl with dark curls, and spun her around, laughing. He belonged here, with them, not with her. Something inside Sophia snapped. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She acted. Before she knew it, she was storming across the street, her pulse a deafening roar in her ears. She reached the door and shoved it open, stepping into the warm, cozy home where she was never supposed to be. Daniel turned, his face draining of color as soon as he saw her. Sophia! How could you do this to me? She spat, her voice shaking with fury. Elisa's smile faded into confusion. Who are you? Daniel took a step towards Sophia, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Sophia, please. Let me explain." "Explain?" she hissed. "Explain what, Daniel? That you're married? That I was just some pathetic mistress while you played house with her?" Elise gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Married? Daniel, what is she talking about?" Daniel hesitated, his gaze darting between them, searching for a way out. But there was no way out. Sophia's hands clenched into fists. The pain in her chest twisted into something dark, something uncontrollable. Her eyes darted around the room until they landed on a gleaming object on a nearby table, a decorative knife. Before she even realized what she was doing, her fingers closed around the handle. Daniel's eyes widened in horror. "Sophia, don't." But it was too late. With a scream of fury, she lunged. The blade plunged into his chest, sinking deep. Blood spurted, staining the pristine white walls. Daniel let out a strangled gasp, his hands clutching at the wound as he staggered backward. Elise shrieked, grabbing her children and shielding them behind her. Daniel's legs buckled, and he crumpled onto the floor, his breath coming in wet, choking gasps. Sophia stood frozen, the knife still trembling in her grip, her mind struggling to process what she had just done. Daniel looked up at her, his lips moving as if trying to speak. But no words came, only a final, gurgling breath. And then nothing. The wail of sirens echoed through the quiet Parisian street, growing louder with every second. Red and blue lights flashed against the white walls, illuminating the horror within the townhouse. Neighbors had heard the commotion, the screaming, the shouts, and finally, Elise's desperate, hysterical sobs. When the police stormed in, they found Sophia sitting on the floor beside Daniel's lifeless body, her hands stained with blood, the knife still clutched between her trembling fingers. Her once pristine dress was splattered with crimson, a stark contrast to the elegance of the home she had invaded. She didn't fight. She didn't speak. She just sat there, staring at Daniel's vacant eyes, as if willing him to wake up and tell her it was all a nightmare. Elise was hysterical, clutching her terrified children as officers restrained her. She sobbed uncontrollably, shouting at Sophia in rapid French, but Sophia barely heard a word. She was dragged out of the house in handcuffs, past a growing crowd of onlookers. Some whispered in hushed voices, while others stood in stunned silence. The American woman who had killed her husband in a crime of passion. Paris had just gained another tragic tale. The trial became a media spectacle. Headlines screamed of love, betrayal, and murder. Reporters dug into Sophia's life, painting her as everything from a scorned woman to a violent criminal. Her defense team argued temporary insanity, a crime of passion fueled by extreme emotional distress. They painted her as a woman who had been deceived, manipulated, and driven to the brink by a man she had devoted her life to. But the prosecution saw it differently. They argued that rage was not an excuse for murder. Sophia had followed Daniel, broken into his home, and taken a weapon, all premeditated actions. In the end, the jury deliberated for just a few hours before delivering their verdict. Guilty. Sophia was sentenced to life in a French prison for the murder of her husband. The cold gray walls of the prison were a far cry from the luxury hotel she had once shared with Daniel. Gone were the candlelit dinners, the whispered, "I love yous," the illusion of a perfect marriage. She spent her days in a cramped cell, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, replaying that night over and over again. Would things have been different if she had just walked away? If she had confronted Daniel calmly? If she had never come to Paris at all? But regrets meant nothing now. Daniel was dead. Elise knew she couldn't stay in Paris. The townhouse, once filled with laughter and love, had become a tomb of painful memories. Every corner reminded her of the night that shattered her world. The night she learned she was not the only wife, not the only woman Daniel had sworn his love to. The whispers followed her everywhere. The curious stares of neighbors, the relentless media attention, the murmurs at the school where her children once felt safe. She had to escape not just for herself, but for them. With what little strength she had left, Elise packed up their lives and left the city behind. No one knew where she went. Some speculated she fled to the countryside of France. Others believed she left the country entirely, trying to erase the past. But no matter how far she ran, she would always carry the scars of betrayal. The media thrived on the scandal, turning the case into an international sensation. Headlines splashed across newspapers and television screens. The Parisian double-life murder. Love, lies, and deadly revenge. Every detail was scrutinized. Talk shows dissected the psychology of a woman pushed to the edge, and social media debated whether Sophia was a monster or a victim. Daniel became infamous, not for his death, but for his deceit. He was no longer just a loving husband or a successful businessman. He was the man who led 2 lives and died because of it. And then there was Sophia. Locked away in a French prison, she became just another inmate. But no cell could imprison her mind. She spent her days replaying every moment, every memory, every lie. The man she had loved so deeply had never truly been hers. Their marriage, their vows, their dreams. It had all been an illusion. At night she dreamt of Daniel. Not the man who betrayed her, but the man she thought he was. The man who held her in his arms, who whispered sweet nothings in her ear, who made her feel like she was the only woman in his world. But then the dream always shifted. The warm embrace turned cold. His whispers became gasps of pain. His hands, once gentle, clutched at the wound she had inflicted. And his eyes, full of love, now stared at her in terror and disbelief. No sentence could be worse than the one she had given herself. The truth had been revealed, but at a devastating cost. Paris, the city of love, had become the city where love was destroyed.